The story that you are about to hear is a compilation of documented true facts, featuring characters, events, or places that has played a role in shaping history. Please sit back and listen as I recite this narrative for you.
On the evening of January 17, 1950, 11 men robbed the Brinks Armored Car Depot at 165 Prince Street in Boston, Massachusetts, of more than $2 million, the equivalent of $29 million today. There was $1,218,211.29 in cash and $1,557,183.83 in checks, money orders, and other securities in the bags. It was almost the ideal crime because the perpetrators were not apprehended until January 1956, just days before the statute of limitations for the theft expired. The idea for the heist came from Joseph or Big Joe McGinnis, who masterminded the crime, and Anthony Fats Pino, a career criminal who recruited a group of 10 other men to stake out the depot for 18 months in order to figure out when it held the most money. The gang stole blueprints for the depot's alarm system and then returned them unnoticed. They also removed the cylinders from the locks one by one and had the keys duplicated by a locksmith. The Brinks robbery took 2 years to plan and included 6 failed attempts. They were all dressed in Navy-style peacoats, gloves, and chauffeur's caps. Each robber had his or her face hidden behind a Halloween mask. One of the gangs wore crepe-soled shoes to muffle their footsteps, while the others wore rubbers. The robbers didn't say much. They moved with a studied precision that suggested the crime had been meticulously planned and rehearsed over the previous months. The criminals had broken open at least 3, possibly 4, locked doors to gain access to the second floor of Brinks, where 5 employees were checking and storing the money collected from Brinks customers that day. At gunpoint, all 5 employees were forced to lie face down on the floor. Their hands were tied behind their backs and adhesive tape was applied to the corners of their mouths. One of the employees had misplaced his glasses during the operation. They later could not be found on the Brinks premises. A buzzer sounded as the loot was being placed in bags and stacked between the second and third doors leading to the Prince Street entrance. The robbers removed the adhesive tape from one of the employees' mouths and discovered that the buzzer indicated that someone wanted to enter the vault area. A garage attendant was the one who pressed the buzzer. 2 of the gang members moved towards the door to apprehend him, but when they saw the garage attendant walk away, apparently unaware of the robbery, they did not pursue him. The men were out and in their getaway car in about 30 minutes after filling 14 canvas bags with cash, coins, checks, and money orders, totaling more than half a ton. The robbery caused no injuries, and the thieves left almost no evidence aside from the rope used to bind the employees and one of the chauffeur's caps. The FBI discovered that the gang had stolen 4 revolvers. The descriptions and serial numbers of these weapons were meticulously recorded because they could provide a valuable link to the perpetrators. The gang agreed to stay out of trouble and not touch the money for 6 years so that the statute of limitations would expire. They were almost there. The investigators had few leads and even fewer solid pieces of evidence. Hundreds of people who lived and worked near the Brinks Depot were interviewed by law enforcement officers and known criminals were questioned. According to the FBI, in the hours immediately following the robbery, the underworld began to feel the heat of the investigation. Police picked up and questioned well-known Boston hoodlums. From Boston, the FBI quickly spread the pressure to other cities. Veteran criminals throughout the United States found their activities during mid-January the subject of official inquiry, the FBI reported. The Brinks case made the front page of the newspaper. Even before Brinks Incorporated offered $100 million reward for information leading to the arrest and conviction of the perpetrators, the case had captured the attention of millions of Americans. People all over the country began sending the FBI tips and theories in the hopes that they would help with the investigation. Because Brinks was in a densely populated tenement district, many hours were spent conducting interviews to locate people in the neighborhood who might have valuable information. A thorough investigation of current and former Brinks employees was conducted. Personnel of the three-story building housing of the Brinks offices were questioned. Inquiries were made concerning salesmen, messengers, and others who had called at Brinks and might know its physical layout as well as its operational procedures. An immediate effort was also made to gather descriptive information about the missing cash and securities. Customers of Brinks were contacted for information on the packaging and shipping materials they used. Customers identifying marks on currency and securities were noted, and appropriate stops were placed at banking institutions across the country. Several criminal gangs were suspected, according to underworld rumors. Members of the 1930s Purple Gang discovered that there was renewed interest in their activities. Another old gang that specialized in hijacking bootleg whiskey in the Boston area during the Prohibition was investigated. Again, the FBI's investigation resulted merely in the elimination of more possible suspects. The massive amount of information gathered during the early weeks of the investigation was constantly sifted through. All attempts to identify the gang members using the chauffeur's hat, the rope, and the adhesive tape left in the Brinks were futile. However, on February 5, 1950, a police officer in Somerville, Massachusetts, recovered one of the 4 revolvers stolen by the robbers. This gun, along with another rusted revolver, was discovered on February 4, 1950, by a group of boys playing on a sandbar at the edge of the Mystic River in Somerville. Soon after these guns were discovered, one of them was placed in a trash barrel and taken to the city dump. The officer picked up the other gun and identified it as having been taken during the Brinks robbery. At the Mystic River, a thorough search for additional weapons was conducted. The outcomes were negative. The FBI learned from interviews with people near the Brinks offices on the evening of January 17, 1950, that a 1949 green Ford stake body truck with a canvas top had been parked near the Brinks Spring Street door at the time of the robbery. From the size of the loot and the number of men involved, it was logical that the gang might have used the truck. This lead was pursued intensively. Pieces of an identical truck were discovered at a dump in Stoughton, Massachusetts on March 4, 1950. The truck had been cut up with an acetylene torch, and it appeared that a sledgehammer had also been used to smash many of the heavy parts, such as the motor. When the truck pieces were discovered, they were hidden in fiber bags. If the ground hadn't been frozen, the person or people who abandoned the bags would have tried to bury them. The truck discovered at the dump had been reported stolen on November 3, 1949, by a Ford dealer near Fenway Park in Boston. All attempts to identify those responsible for the theft and those who had cut up the truck were futile. The fiber bags used to conceal the pieces were identified as beef bone containers shipped from South America to a gelatin manufacturing company in Massachusetts. Extensive inquiries were made into the disposition of the bags following their receipt by the Massachusetts firm. This phase of the investigation was thoroughly investigated. It was ineffective. Nonetheless, the discovery of the truck parts in Stoughton, Massachusetts proved to be a crucial break in the investigation. 2 of the Brinks robbery participants lived in the Stoughton area. Following the discovery of the truck parts, these men were shrouded in even more suspicion. As the investigation developed and thousands of leads were followed to dead ends, the broad field of possible suspects gradually began to narrow. Among the suspects were Anthony Pino, Joseph McGinnis, Joseph James O'Keefe, Stanley Albert Gosciora, Adolph Jas Maffei, Henry Baker, and Vincent James Costa. The FBI's examination of the suspects' alibis revealed that the time of 7:00 p.m. on January 17, 1950 was frequently mentioned. O'Keefe had checked out of his hotel around 7:00 p.m. Pino and Baker made separate plans to leave at 7:00 p.m. At around 7:00 p.m., Costa began returning to the motor terminal. Other key suspects were unable to provide convincing accounts of their actions that evening. Because the robbery occurred between 7:10 and 7:27 p.m., it was highly likely that a gang, as well drilled as the Brinks robbers were, would have planned a rendezvous at a specific time. By fixing this time as close as possible to the minute at which the robbery was to begin, the robbers would have alibis to cover their activities up to the final moment. When the FBI received information that part of the Brinks loot was hidden in the home of an O'Keefe relative in Boston, a search warrant was executed and several $100s were discovered hidden in the house but could not be identified as part of the loot. O'Keefe and Gashora had both been interviewed about the Brinks robbery on multiple occasions, but they had both claimed complete ignorance. Despite the lack of evidence and witnesses on which to base court proceedings, as the investigation progressed, there was little doubt that O'Keefe was a key figure in the Brinks robbery. Pino also was linked with the robbery, and there was every reason to suspect that O'Keefe felt Pino was turning his back on him now that O'Keefe was in jail. When O'Keefe got out of prison, Pino sent a hitman to kill him. There were 3 attempts made on his life. O'Keefe was again arrested for violating probation on a gun-carrying charge. He was sentenced to serve 27 months in prison. Because of this, he carefully pondered his position. It appeared to him that he would spend his remaining days in prison, while his co-conspirators would have many years to enjoy the luxuries of life. Even if released, he thought, his days were numbered. He grew increasingly resentful of his former associates. After weeks of empty promises of help and deliberate stalling by gang members, he realized his threats were falling on deaf ears. He couldn't physically harm his Boston criminal associates while incarcerated, and the gang believed that his talking would be futile because he would be implicated in the Brinks robbery alongside the others. O'Keefe told the entire story of the Brinks robbery. Following each interview, FBI agents worked late into the night verifying all aspects of his story that were subject to verification. Many of the details had been obtained previously during the 6-year investigation. Other information provided by O'Keefe helped to fill in the gaps that remained. On January 12, 1956, FBI agents apprehended 6 members of the gang: Baker, Costa, Keegan, Maffey, McGinnis, and Pino. They were detained in lieu of bail, which totaled more than $100,000 for each of them. 3 of the remaining 5 gang members had previously been identified, with O'Keefe and Goshiora in prison on other charges and Banfield deceased. Faherty and Richardson fled to avoid arrest and were later placed on the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list. Their success in evading arrest ended abruptly on May 16, 1956, when FBI agents raided the apartment in Dorchester, Massachusetts, where they were hiding. Faherty and Richardson were apprehended while searching for 3 loaded revolvers that they had left on a chair in the apartment's bathroom. The hideout was also discovered to have more than $5,000 in coins. Only $58,000 of the $2.7 million stolen was recovered. The rest is said to be hidden in the hills north of Grand Rapids, Minnesota. The 11-man gang that stole the money after 2 years of meticulous planning nearly got away with it. They failed because they couldn't agree on how to divide the spoils. All of them were apprehended by police 5 days before the statute of limitations ended.
Hey everyone, I just wanted to say that I am incredibly grateful that you took time out of your schedule to listen to my narration. This is Nikki of Twysted Mind, wishing you a great rest of your day. Salamat.